Have you ever felt like the government just isn't working for you? Well, imagine a time when that wasn't just a feeling, it was a fact. A time when the whole system was fundamentally broken, corrupted from the inside out by money and power. It was a crisis, for sure, but it sparked a revolution, not with guns, but with ideas. This is the story of how a generation of reformers took on a government that was basically for sale and put the power back where it belongs, with the people. So, to really get what they fixed, we have to look at just how broken things were. We're going back to the late 1800s, a time called the Gilded Age, and it was called gilded for a reason. On the surface, everything looked shiny and new, but underneath all that gold paint, the political system was just rotting away. And this crisis was everywhere you looked. In the big cities, you had these corrupt political machines that controlled literally everything. At the national level, monopolists, the titans of industry, were using their incredible wealth to buy politicians and kill any laws that might protect workers or consumers. And getting a government job, it wasn't about what you knew, it was about who you knew, a system they called patronage. And the worst part? Everybody knew about it, thanks to these new investigative journalists they called muckrakers. The whole system was just drowning in scandal. And wow, does this cartoon just nail the problem? You're looking at the industrialist John D. Rockefeller, and he's literally holding the U.S. Capitol and the Treasury in the palm of his hand. The caption says it all. What a funny little government. For these massive trusts, that's exactly what it was, a tiny little plaything they could manipulate for profit. But you can only push people so far, right? Citizens started to fight back. And this war on corruption, it didn't start in Washington, D.C. It started on the streets of America's cities. The change was going to come from the ground up. So where do you even start with a mess that big? Well, the reformers went after the two biggest problems first, patronage and the political machines. Starting way back in the 1880s, they pushed for change, and it led to laws like the Pendleton Act. For the first time, this law said that a lot of government jobs had to be earned based on merit by passing an exam. It was a huge first step. It's funny how history works sometimes. The thing that really kicked these reforms into high gear wasn't some grand plan, it was a disaster. In 1900, a massive hurricane absolutely devastated Galveston, Texas. The city's corrupt and totally incompetent government just fell apart. They couldn't handle the crisis. And in the aftermath, the citizens demanded something totally new. And out of the rubble of Galveston came this thing called the City Commission. The idea was simple, but man, was it revolutionary. Instead of one powerful mayor who could be controlled by a political boss, you'd have a committee of experts. A commissioner for fire, one for police, one for sanitation, running the city. The goal was to replace political power with actual expertise. And this idea caught on. Other cities saw what was happening in Galveston and thought, hey, we can make that even better. So they refined the model and created the city manager system. The commission would hire a trained professional and, this is key, non-political manager to handle the day-to-day stuff. The idea was to run a city like an efficient business, not like a political favor factory. Okay, so the cities are starting to get their act together. The next logical step? Taking the fight to the state capitals. The goal now was to find a way to just bypass the corrupt politicians altogether and give people like you and me a direct voice in our government. And the real trailblazer here was Wisconsin's governor, a guy they called Fighting Bob La Follette. His plan was called the Wisconsin Idea, and it was a total game changer for state government. He brought in experts from the university to help write laws, he created the first state income tax, and he took on the powerful railroad companies that had been running the state for decades. Just look at this cartoon. It tells the whole story. On the left, that's the before. You see Wisconsin being strangled by this giant railroad octopus. But then, on the right, that's the after. After La Follette's reforms, Wisconsin becomes a model state with good laws. It literally became the laboratory for democracy for the whole country. Now, these weren't just new laws. They were entirely new tools for democracy. And one of the most powerful was the recall. Think about it. This gave voters the power to actually fire an elected official in the middle of their term if they weren't doing a good job. A pretty radical idea, right? And the recall was just one tool in the new toolbox. You also had the initiative, which let citizens literally initiate a law. You could write it yourself and get it on the ballot for a public vote. The referendum kind of works the other way. It lets voters approve or reject a law the politicians already passed. And maybe the biggest one of all was the direct primary, which took the power of choosing candidates away from party bosses in back rooms and gave it directly to the voters. This wave of reform got so big it went all the way to the U.S. Constitution. See, before 1912, U.S. senators weren't elected by the people. They were chosen by politicians at the state level, which, as you can imagine, was full of corruption and backroom deals. The 17th Amendment changed all that. It gave the power to elect senators directly to the American people. This was a massive shift in power. So this idea, this momentum, that government should answer directly to the people, had conquered cities and states. And now it was headed for the White House. And it arrived in the explosive, dynamic form of one of America's most famous presidents, Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt had a totally different vision for what a president should be. This quote says it all. He saw himself as a steward of the people. He believed it was his job, his duty, to do whatever the people needed, as long as the Constitution didn't specifically say he couldn't. I mean, this was a radical expansion of presidential power, and it was all in the name of the public good. So what was his big plan? He called it the Square Deal, because he wanted every single American to get a fair shot. It basically came down to three big things. First, break up the harmful monopolies, what they called trust busting. Second, regulate big business to protect consumers. And third, conserve America's incredible natural resources for all of us. And he did not waste any time. This cartoon shows him literally wrestling with the railroad monopolies, and that's pretty much what he did. He wasn't afraid to take on the most powerful people in the country, using an old, ignored law to break up these corporate giants. In just 7 years, his administration busted 25 different trusts. But here's the thing, Roosevelt wasn't just a bull in a china shop. He was strategic. This cartoon of him as a hunter really explains it well. He made a distinction between good trusts and bad trusts. He figured some big companies were just more efficient and innovative, and that was fine. His goal was to hunt down and get rid of only the bad trusts, the ones that used their power to crush competition and hurt the public. Roosevelt's Square Deal was about more than just busting up a few companies. It was about creating a whole new blueprint for American government. It established this pretty radical idea that the federal government actually has a direct responsibility for the well-being of its people. And he put that idea into action. When a book called The Jungle exposed the disgusting, horrific conditions in the meatpacking industry, Roosevelt pushed Congress to pass the Meat Inspection Act. He signed the Pure Food and Drug Act to stop companies from selling dangerous medicines with fake claims. And when a massive coal strike threatened to freeze the country, he became the first president ever to step in on behalf of the public, not just the company owners. And on top of all that, Roosevelt was America's first great conservationist president. And the scale of what he did is just staggering. During his time in office, his administration set aside 195 million acres of land for federal protection. To give you some perspective, that is an area of land bigger than the entire state of Texas, saved for all future generations. You know, when you look at this map of our national parks and forests, in a lot of ways, you're looking at a map of the Progressive era's legacy. It's a beautiful, lasting reminder that some things are too precious to be sold off and that they have to be preserved for everyone. It's a legacy that's literally written right on the American landscape. So, what's the big takeaway from all of this? The Progressive era completely redefined American government. It created the principle that government could and should be a tool to protect people from unchecked corporate power. But to do that, it also dramatically expanded the government's size and authority. And that leaves us with a question we are still debating today. How much power is too much? And over 100 years later, do you think we found the right balance?